I'm Despina Katsakakis, and as DEGW's chairman, I'm delighted to welcome you here this evening for our annual Founders Lecture. My focus this evening will be to explore the role and purpose of space in our ever-changing world. And organizations are daily challenged with staying in business, saving money, being responsive, whilst at the same time energizing culture, supporting flexibility, and reducing their carbon footprint. I'm going to be a little challenging and say that I think the construction industry has its head firmly planted in the sand and still hopes that the economy will turn around and people will want office space as they've always wanted it in the past. We continue to design large, monofunctional buildings, and yet we have quite compelling evidence that they're not what organizations demand. In a recent article for Property Week, 66% of the organizations surveyed said they would not be renewing their expiring leases. We know from all of our clients that almost without exception, they're all planning to respond to future growth by implementing new ways of working. The future is inherently uncertain, and flexibility is the key. And whilst we use the term sustainability, I'd like to propose that we think of a better term, such as resiliency. Sustainability is quite a static concept. It doesn't really talk about the changes and improvements that we're experiencing. And the environments we create should be able to handle unexpected change and yet be able to regenerate and be diverse and resilient. Place has a very significant role to play in supporting employee engagement. We know that successful organizations are made up of people who are connected, inspired, learn through collaborations, share ideas, and are continuously motivated towards excellence. And certainly the next generation of business leadership is constantly pushing the boundaries by driving both efficiency and innovation, streamlining the middle ranks, downsizing bureaucracies, and taking creative risks. We talk frequently of the future generation, the young generation of workforce, but at the same time we know that increasingly most of us will continue to work, whether we need to be topping up our pensions or whether the organizations will continue to rely on bringing that knowledge and expertise much more into the workplace. And at both ends of this generational span, the individuals require, ironically, exactly the same thing: convenience, control, and choice about how, when, and where they work, increasing focus on work-life balance, and they're all attracted to unique, casual, and collaborative workplaces. And ironically, buildings have not changed to keep up with the rate of change of organizations. So they're continuing to be disconnected from organizational change. We know that most of the design of office space focuses on models of enclosure or open plan, and at most begins to think about the addition of communal support spaces. Whilst most organizations have not just broken the link between the workplace and the individual, in fact, they are increasingly focusing on how to deliver and support full non-territorial environments. That is continuously backed up by data. Our data collection on the use of office space has, over the last 20 years, constantly validated the fact that on a typical working day, across any sector, across any geography, people typically sit at their desks for 35% of their time, and they're in the building at best about 60% of the time. So the employees have left the building, even if we're still assigning them individual workplaces. And if we think about the total available time in a day, we're only using office buildings for less than 10% of the time. When we talk about sustainability and reducing carbon emissions in buildings, we still typically focus in new construction, which makes up less than 2% of the building stock in the developed world. And even at that, we typically look at specification that will help reduce a part of the total output, as opposed to seriously challenging the total amount that we require. The opportunity exists for us to really think differently about sustainability through engaging intensification, using office space differently over time, embracing distributed work strategies, and seriously challenging and driving hard different locations in the city. In a recent case study for one of our clients in the US, in order to determine the impact of accommodating an additional 200 people in either a new building or in a flexible workplace strategy, we calculated that in a flexible workplace strategy, not having to house those additional 200 people saved about 2,000 metric tons of CO2 per year. If we add to that the actual reduced commuting time, that gives us a total of over 2,300 metric tons of CO2s. The conventional approach, which would have been a specification of introducing photovoltaics on that site, would have actually saved just over 340 metric tons, so just over 10%. When people are given the choice to work from home, they typically give back much more time to their employer. So just working from home one day a week could increase productivity by 2 to 3%. So there's a sustainability benefit, there's a productivity benefit, and there's a business flexibility benefit, because we know that business cycles are completely unpredictable. And our ability to disengage the ownership of the individual to the desk means that business units can respond to opportunity and employ or reduce their headcount without being restricted by property constraints. Long-term growth and contraction can be smoothed across the existing real estate or even reduced real estate portfolio. And the intelligent city needs to respond to that need by actually looking at urban environments that increasingly blur living, learning, working, and moving, to create much more dynamic diversity of places and people to support our ever-changing demands. That, of course, means that our buildings will continue to be challenged and change. The role of a single-use, single-function, isolated building is no longer sustainable or valid on any level. Increasingly, our buildings will need to become much more complex, mixed use, and begin to integrate functions that we might not even think as conventional. This primary school in New Zealand is actually located in redundant space above a department store in what would have been either retail or office space. It allows a better use of the space, a better engagement with the community, and brings together the models that will create sustainable solutions. A project we did over nearly 10 years ago now in the Netherlands for Shell. This is a residential learning center for Shell's senior leadership, where we brought together Shell, a Holiday Inn, and a developer to deliver a building which 9 to 5, actually 24 hours a day, from Monday to Friday is used by Shell. And on the weekend, it is converted by switching all of the signage into Holiday Inn's logos and branding. And this engagement arena, which was custom designed for the Shell leadership team, actually becomes a very profitable cabaret for Holiday Inn on the weekend. Our emphasis with both buildings and cities will be about connecting people. The more we interact virtually, the more we will look at physical events to sustain our connection to one another. New space models will be developed that will actually be designed primarily around patterns of human interaction. Everything about engaging people will focus on maximizing those elements to actually create destinations in their own right, to maximize communication and business value for the organization. And in fact, I think you've experienced that just by walking through the atrium space to come into this room this evening. The office environment itself will no longer be made up by rows of desks, but actually a richer variety of work settings which will blur the boundaries between personal, shared, and public spaces to support organizational innovation. Increasingly, I think, we will find that buildings themselves will not be the focus, almost in the way of what happened in the technology world. I think the emphasis will be increasingly on the software. Higher levels of flexibility, of services, and support from the landlord will be what tenants are looking for. This intranet site created by Chiswick Park to engage tenants within the park and create a community and across the city is characteristic of the new types of offerings that developers will be looking to support tenants. Buildings will go from being all about managing power and control of the organization to actually providing a node for connection, managing that delocation of people, process, and place by fostering community and culture. Over the last 5 years in the work that we've done with the OGC, first in looking at the process of bringing down the barriers through the Working Without Walls initiatives and opening up government departments. And over this last year, in this next iteration of Working Beyond Walls, aims to bring that model of distributed working across not just the city, but across the regions that the UK government supports. So this model where work can take place in locations that are owned and managed by the organization or by others, and also invites others to come into it, is an incredibly powerful model for actually demonstrating the role of the government and its relationship to the taxpayer. And the benefits are actually quite immense from the internal aspect of the government. And in this recent example for the Department of Children, Schools and Families, by implementing flexible working across the entire organization, not only were we able to reduce space by 40%, but also save 10 million per annum in accommodation costs, eliminate churn costs, and more importantly, transform the cultural messages where space no longer reflects status. A more dynamic atmosphere is provided across the organization, and the messages that this is giving about the role of government are, of course, incredibly different to our image of what it was in the past. So, future direction will inevitably be about increased mobility. Our buildings will be used much more intensely if we take that on. Also, our buildings will need to be simpler to support flexibility and diversity of accommodation, and places and cities will become more complex. All of that will require a new generation of management systems for supporting distributed work. We will need to actually embrace 3 key elements. First, to understand how we can provide the right space for the right people with the right technology. There is not one solution that is applicable for everyone. We need to understand what the mixture of work profiles are in an organization in order to determine the right space for the work that they're doing. And we need to also provide a very different set of spaces away from limited options and rigid boundaries of planning to many more options, softer boundaries that enable mobility and distribution of that work. The second aspect we need to address is the role of core buildings, because core buildings increasingly will be the destination, the flagship of the organization that brings community together. A great example of this is the work that we've been doing for GSK Consumer Healthcare, where we've worked with them to create these innovation hubs where people from across the organization come together within the central building to actually bring new ideas and creativity with customer at the center. Not only is this effective in terms of achieving phenomenal growth for the organization, GSK reckoned that they have achieved double-digit growth by using the physical environment and organizational fusion as an enabler to drive that innovation. The third way will be through the appropriate third-party partnerships. Short lease, pay-as-you-go, flexible space to support people wherever they're working. Some of those will take the form of office clubs, regional work centers, cultural buildings that are reinvented, or retail environments. What we know for sure is that the benefits of mobile workplace will become the new baseline. However, the importance of face-to-face interaction will persist. We've been rolling out flexible workplace strategies with Accenture since they were Andersen Consulting in the 90s, and then all through the last 8 years, looking at ways to continue to drive the effectiveness of their business through a flexible workplace strategy. We have just begun a program of what is called Workplace 2.0, which is a drive of high-performance focus for people that will also match a transformation of the portfolio. And the question from Accenture to us is, if people are booking space to come in and sit at a desk to do email, do they need to ever be in the office at all and do that? What they want them to do is come into the office and engage creatively and be connected to the organization. So the targets of Workplace 2.0 are still, of course, driving down cost and being more efficient through flexible, adaptable design. They're certainly about reducing carbon emissions through sustainable design, reducing real estate, and leveraging technology to reduce travel and bring people together in different ways. But increasingly, the real focus is on employee engagement and effectiveness, creating much more flexible work arrangements, having the right people doing the right job, facilitating collaboration. What we are seeing the future of the office to be will be increasingly environments that support virtual and face-to-face engagement in different ways. Environments for collaboration, as you see in the Google images on the right, and environments for shared technology. But these types of shared collaborative technologies will transform the way we come together. So offices will become places to actually engage us both virtually and physically more and more. So the new portfolio and workplace strategy starts from business agility, the ability to speed up decisions, to support distributed collaboration, to create more dynamic teamwork enablement. It really is about focusing on productivity for individuals and groups and supporting that creativity, and always measuring employee satisfaction. And that is underpinned by a corporate real estate portfolio flexibility that increases capacity without increasing space, supports mobility, and actually ultimately delivers efficiency through higher densities, balancing standardization and customization where appropriate. I think this trend really puts forward a significant challenge to the supply chain, and we can only do that through proper user engagement. I believe that leadership and design are parallel processes because they both have a vision of an end outcome and actually understand that that engagement process is transformational. And we can use those two to bring together purposeful design of places and deliver real resiliency through a combination of diversity, collaboration, and dispersal. If we manage to do that, the benefits will be immense. At the level of the individual, the organization, and our cities, we'll be able to optimize time, enhance the quality of our experiences, liberate capital and support networking and innovation, and reinvent our cities and create sustainable places. Ultimately, we should be aiming to manage space and time to create lasting value by doing more with less at every level. Thank you very much.